Hey guys, Sean Duff here, and today we're going to look at setting up this cheeky augmented reality glitch style animation inside Cinema 4D. I was inspired to have a go at this technique after seeing the amazing work from Eduard Mykhailov. Sorry if my Aussie accent's butchering your name there, mate. And he used After Effects to create some truly impressive pieces. And it got me thinking I wanted to try and use Cinema 4D to pull off some similar results. The setup we're going to put together is going to give us a lot of control to iterate quickly, try different things, and the entire animation is put together with only 2 keyframes. We'll touch on a few key points that should give you a good understanding of how to attack a similar project for yourself. I wanted to start this off by going over a bit of the setup of the actual graphics, then we'll build out that glitch animation before throwing in some fun camera movement. Also, a special thanks to my mate Lukey Boy for putting together the sound design on this piece for me. Guys, his socials will be linked in the description. Go check him out, he really deserves it. With that said, let's take a quick look at what we're going to be creating and then we'll jump straight in.
Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Bezos.
Alright, before we get into it, I thought I'd give you a look at where my scene ended up and then we'll start to break it down. So we've got a static iPhone sitting on a floor and we're glitching the screen up above it, and that's what we're going to really focus on today. We're trying to create this fun augmented reality where we see the screen, where the screen almost feels like it's jumping off the actual surface and floating in real 3D space. So this is what we'll have a look at today, creating this fun, fast-paced glitch style animation inside Cinema 4D. Now some of those example shots you saw was created by using actual footage and then motion tracking that before applying the glitch effect. Now, I want to simplify that a bit, and rather than doing any motion tracking, we're just going to focus on the technique of how we can start to create this fun glitch style animation really quickly. All right, so now that we've seen the final look, let's start breaking this bad boy down. Now I'm going to jump into Photoshop quickly. Now I've got this great iOS 7 kit that I've downloaded, and I'll pop a link for you guys down in the description. This gives us a great starting point of some standard iPhone elements that's going to allow us to help sell the realism of this look. Now the first thing I'll do is focus on the lock screen. So I'm going to make a duplicate of that. I'm going to duplicate that into a new document. So I'm going to select our little background that's on this iPhone screen and hold Command while clicking on its little thumbnail, and it's going to make a marquee selection around that layer. Then we can just hit C to bring up the crop tool, press enter twice, and there we go. We've got a nice crop of just that iPhone screen. Now, a fun thing with this technique is we want to try and treat each element as its own separate thing. It's going to allow the whole glitch animation to feel more random. So a great way to do that using this template, I'm going to select our background again and just turn it off. And what that's done for us is we've now got this nice transparent background, but still with all those elements over the top. So I'm going to save a version of this. This is going to be our iPhone screen base. We can keep this as a Photoshop file, but I'm just going to output this as a PNG, and that's going to allow us to maintain that transparent background when we bring it inside Cinema 4D. Great. Now before we jump back into Cinema, what I want to check now is our canvas size. And you can see our width is 22 with a height of 40. So essentially we've got about a 2:1 ratio here, and now we can take that and key it into Cinema and allow us to get more accurate results so we don't skew our image and we get it looking as close as possible to the real thing, which is going to help sell the whole glitch effect. Alright, so let's jump back into Cinema 4D. And what we need to do is drop a plane, and we're going to use this plane as our screen. So we can do something as simple as go 220 wide and maintain that height of 400, and now we've got a plane that is essentially the same size as our canvas inside Photoshop. Alright, I'm going to double click in my material editor to create a new material. Let's load that up. So I'm going to turn off the color as well as the reflectance channel, and we're going to focus on the alpha at the moment. So let's turn that on, and this is where we're going to load in that image that we just saved out of Photoshop. Now, if I drop this material onto our plane, you're going to notice it's now gone transparent except for where we've got those details that were still saved within that image. Nice, this is a good start for us. Now we can do things like turn on the luminance channel, and there we go. We've now got back our white elements. I'm going to close our material for the moment, and what we need to do now is start to treat these elements separately. We want to create individual elements for each graphic we see on this plane at the moment. I'm going to hit MB to reveal our polygons. And at the moment we've got 20 width and 20 height segments, and I think that's going to work quite nicely for this technique. I'm going to make a copy of my plane just so we can come back to that base layer if we need it, but we'll hide that for the moment. Now on our new copy, I'm going to hit C to make that editable. Then with my polygon selection tool, it's now time to start selecting those polygons where we can see in separate graphics. So I think to start with, let's focus on the time right in the center here. I'm going to select each polygon that has part of that graphic touching it. The first time I was exploring this technique, I actually brought in each element separately rather than separating them inside Cinema, but I'm just thinking this way might be a little bit quicker for us. And I'll show you why I think this is going to help us in just a little bit. So now that we've selected each polygon that's got part of the time and date on it, I'm going to hit UP, and that's going to split it off into its own separate plane. We can now delete that off our base plane. Now if I hide that, you're going to see we've got our time separate on its own layer. And this is exactly what we want. We can even rename this time and date because we're going to have quite a few layers in this, so to keep it as organized as possible is just going to help us in the long run. Let's reselect our base plane, and I'm going to continue that exact technique for the remaining elements, selecting the polygons we need, hitting UP to split them off, and then deleting them off that base layer. Nice, now we've been able to separate each of those elements onto their own separate plane. I can hit NA to reveal those polygons, and now you can see that we don't actually see the entire shape. We're only seeing the graphic thanks to that alpha channel. Let's add a few extra graphics into our hierarchy before we start to animate this. So let's make a new material, turn off the reflectance as well as the color, and I'm just going to turn on the luminance again. Now I'm going to load up a few extra graphics that are from that same iOS kit that you guys can download. Now the first one is this keyboard. So let's load that image in, and let's turn on the copy of this plane here. Now I'm going to replace this material with the new one we've just made. Now at first you can notice our material stretches to fill that entire canvas, but that's not quite what we want. This is now stretching our graphic, and we've lost the realism of it. Now we can go back into Photoshop and get the exact size, but I'm just going to change it. I'm just going to tweak our height a little bit just so it starts to feel more right within the scene. And somewhere about there is looking good for us. I'm going to jump into our top view for a second to make it a little bit easier and just turn back on that base plane. Now this is going to help us, now we're going to use this base plane to help us position things more accurately within the scene. So what I'm going to do is actually make a new material and just override that one just so there's no transparency and we can see the entire thing. Cool. Now let's grab our plane that we've got our keyboard on, and I'm just going to pull this down. I'm just going to pull this down so it reaches right at the base there. Nice. Let's make a copy of our keyboard plane. First, let's just rename this. Let's make a copy of that keyboard plane. Make a copy of our keyboard texture. Jump into that. And we're going to replace that texture with this table view shot, which is from that exact same kit. Let's open that up. We'll rename this one table view. Let's pull it up so it reaches the top of our screen. Nice, we're now starting to layer up these elements. We've got something we can play with now. I'm going to jump back into my perspective view. All right, there's one last thing I want to have a look at before we start to animate the glitches in this scene. So we've made a copy of our keyboard material. Let's load that up. And inside the luminance channel, what I want to do is create a layer. Let's jump into our layer, and what we're going to do here is load in just a flat white color. So let's go shader, color. Now just by simply changing how this is transferred between the images, if we change this to difference, what that's going to do is now invert our original bitmap image. And now we can use this to create another keyboard layer, replace our material, and just by having this, and I'll just pull this up a little bit so you can see it. And now we've been able to create another layer by using the same material, but we're going to get a different look. I'm going to undo that so we don't move it. All right, so now we've got a few elements in our scene, I think it's time we have a look at how we're actually going to start animating these glitches. So the first thing, let's go up to MoGraph and we're going to drop a cloner into our scene, and we're going to be using this to drive a heap of the animation. Now let's select all the elements that we've created with graphics, and I'm going to feed them into my cloner. Now you're going to notice a couple of things. First is a lot of our elements aren't being seen. A lot of our elements seem to have disappeared from the scene. And that's because our cloner is only showing 3 of the elements at any given time. So the first thing I'll do is reduce any of the Y height in our scene. And as soon as I start increasing this count, you're going to start to notice those elements start to pop back in. Now, like I was saying how before, where I brought in each of these elements separately last time, as opposed to this example where we've separated those elements inside Cinema, you're going to notice what happens here. Each of these elements has the exact same axis point. They're all exactly center of our scene because they're based off the plane axis point that we originally separated them from. Now, the reason this is good is because when we feed things into a cloner, it wants to zero out that item's axis point to the same as itself. Now, I think where this is going to make sense is you're going to notice our keyboard, you can see our keyboard has actually jumped up in space. And that's because its access point was different from that of the cloner. So a simple way we can fix this is before we take it into the cloner, we'll make it editable. What we'll need to do is shift our access point. So by enabling the access mode, I can zero out that position. I can zero out its position, hit apply, and now that's exactly center and the exact same position of our cloner. So now when I feed that keyboard graphic into our cloner, it's not going to shift. Now let's do that exact same thing for our remaining 2 items. Hit C on both of them and then reposition the Z axis point of each so they're perfectly 0 and center of our scene. And then we can drop both these items back into our cloner without fear of them moving around. So that's just a quick little workaround if you're having issues with your cloner repositioning your elements. Nice, so now I've got all our graphics in our cloner at the exact same start position that we want them in. So let's jump back into our cloner, and I'm going to change how our clones are being sorted. So let's change it from iterate to random. And now what this is doing is at any given time, what our count is, it'll show a random selection of elements that are within our cloner. So if I reduce our count to something like 5, when we've got 10 elements within our cloner. So when I say that I only want to show 5 at any given time, what that's doing is selecting 5 at random to show, and it'll hide the other 5. And now where this technique becomes really cool is we can just change our seed number here, and we'll get a completely unique 5 random elements each time. So let's do that. Let's animate our seed here. To make it nice and easy, I'm going to change it to 1. Hit my keyframe, come forward 90 frames, change it to 10, and add another keyframe. And what this means is we're now going to have 10 random changes over the length of our timeline. Now when I hit play, you can see this is working perfect for us. We have those 10 changes happening over our timeline. Okay, this is looking okay, but what we really want is for these to push up off the screen. We want to create that augmented reality feel where it's no longer a flat screen. We're seeing things project into 3D space. So a real simple way we can do that is with our cloner selected, let's come over to MoGraph, and I'm going to add a step effector. Now by default, that's going to affect our scale, which isn't what we want to do. So I'm going to turn that off, and what we're going to be playing with is just the Y position. So let's make this something like 100. And now when I hit play, we start getting this random positioning happening on Y thanks to this step effector. Now at any point, we can come back into our cloner and increase our count if we thought we wanted to get more elements showing at any given time. Now, if I increase this to beyond the count that we have of items in our cloner, it'll just start duplicating those elements. So let's change this to something like 10 for now, so we're getting a good variation of elements. Noticing our table view is probably taking over a little bit, so what I'm going to do is make a copy of our table view within our cloner as well as the texture in our material editor and do the same thing that we did before. Let's make a layer channel jump into that shader, color, add that white color into our hierarchy, and then just change it to difference, allowing us to get that inverted look of our bitmap image. Close that off, and I'll just replace the texture on our table. Nice, we're now just getting a few extra random elements happening in this scene. Great, so what we've got at the moment, we've got that random cycle thanks to the cloner, and with having the step effector push our elements up in space, we're now being able to get a little bit of height and depth purely with these graphics. All right, cool. Now I think what we need to have a look at is creating those glitch artifacts, the stretch and pull and the manipulation of these graphics. So let's come back to frame 0, and I'm just going to disable our step effector for a minute. And with our cloner selected, I'm now going to feed this into a Voronoi fracture. Great, so now that we've got this, we can instantly see these fractures have been created from those elements within our cloner. Now, if you saw my glitch text tutorial, we're going to be doing a similar technique to create these glitch artifacts. So let's come over to the source of our Voronoi fracture, and I'm just going to remove that. Completely. Let's jump into our top view for a moment so we're perfectly looking down at our elements. And we're going to be controlling the fractures through a spline. So let's grab our pen tool, and I'm just going to make a line directly through the center of all those graphics. Let's jump back into our Voronoi fracture, and now we can just feed in that spline. And there we go, we've got these perfect horizontal shards now happening within those graphics. Jump back into our perspective view. Now let's select that spline within the source field of our Voronoi fracture, and rather than even, what I like to look at is count. And the reason for this is it's going to generate points along that spline, but not evenly. We're just going to get this random count. If I increase this something like 30, you're going to see it a bit easier. You can see right in the center here, we've got these nice and big chunks as well as some thinner ones as well. Nice, so we've now been able to fracture all those elements within our cloner. Let's select our Voronoi fracture, come over to Object, and I'm just going to turn off Colorize Fractures to allow us to see our graphics again. Jump back to frame 0, I'll turn on our step effector for a second and hit play. At the moment, you're going to notice nothing's really changed because we're not affecting those fractures. So that's what we're going to have a look at now. With our Voronoi fracture selected, I'm going to hold down Alt, come up to MoGraph, Effectors, and let's just drop in a random effector. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see what's going on. And by default, this random effector is going to be pushing all our fractures randomly 50 centimeters in X, Y, and Z. So the first thing I do is just zero out any of that Y or Z randomness so you can see what happens purely with the X. Now if I increase this, you can see what's going on. We're getting random positioning happening along that X axis. So I'm going to make this about 70 for now. We're getting some nice randomness happening throughout. And we might even, just for a bit of fun, add some randomness to the Y. I'm not going to go crazy here. Something like 5 should be heaps for us. And now when I hit play, all those fractures are randomly positioned, but we don't want it to be applied globally all the time. We still want to be able to recognize the graphics at certain moments and have these little animated glitch pockets happening within these graphics. So let's rename a few things in our scene here. So with our Voronoi fracture random selected, let's come over to our fall off, and we're actually going to change the shape from infinite to source. And now when I hit play, we've now lost all those fractures because we need to feed in a source link for this random effector to take place. So let's come over to frame 0. Just going to rotate around my scene a little bit here. And now what we'll do is drop a sphere into our scene. Now this sphere is purely going to be used as a bit of a visual reference for us so we can see where the glitches are happening. So let's reduce our radius to something like 5. We might even go something like 10 so we can see it a little bit easier. Holding down Alt with the sphere selected, let's drop that into a cloner. So our mode is currently set to linear. Let's change that to something like grid array, and we're going to create far more spheres happening in our scene. I'll drop a camera so we can come back to that little spot we're framing up. I'm just going to spin around so we can get a better idea of where these spheres are passing throughout. I'm actually going to jump into all 4 views and frame up our cloner. So all I'm going to do here is just increase the size a little bit so we're capturing our entire geometry that we've started to set up of our screen. What I'll even do is just increase the count a little bit. So I've gone 5 in the X, 3 in my Y, as well as 5 in the Z axis. Might even just go 4 in our Y axis as well for the moment. Now again, let's jump back into our perspective view. Might even jump back into that camera for a minute. And now I hit play. And still you'll notice we don't have any of that glitch animation happening. So let's jump back into our Verneuil fracture random effector, and we'll feed in that cloner we've just made into the source link field. I'll hide my cloner for a second. And now what you might notice is we're getting these little bits of glitch happening wherever our geometry passes through one of our spheres. I'll turn back on our cloner for a second. And when I frame around here, you can see wherever the sphere is, it's now activating the glitch. Now this is all right, but we can push this a little bit further. Let's pause this for a second and jump back to frame 0. I'm going to select our cloner and we'll rename this cloner random source. And with that selected, I'm going to drop in another random into our scene. And this is going to be our cloner source random. And again, because we had our clone selected at the start, that random effector is instantly applied. So let's select our random and we'll come over to the effector tab. And our random mode, rather than being random, I'm going to make it noise because I want to have these animated. So now when I hit play, we're getting a little bit of animation happening in those spheres. And because of that, we're now getting a little bit of animation as well happening within our glitches. Now we can push this a little bit further. This is where we're going to be able to create some really interesting looks with how we control this cloner source random. So the first thing I'll do, increase the size of how much randomness this is actually having effect in our scene. I'm going to hit play, and you'll start to notice we're not having that randomness happening everywhere now. We're now just getting these small little glitch pockets. What we might even need to do is reduce the scale of our noise inside this random effector. Let's go something like 15. And now we're starting to get snappier animation. There's not as much delay because these spheres are moving quicker. I'll undo hiding them from my scene so you can see exactly what's going on. Now at any point, if we reduce the amount of spheres, let's go 2, 2, and 1. You'll now notice we get far less of that glitch because there's less spheres passing through our geometry. All right, let's undo that, take our cloner back to where we were, and we're back to getting a heap of that glitch animation. Now the reason I love this setup is it's really easy to control, but on top of that, we're given a heap of ability to really customize this look. For example, at the moment, our Verneuil fracture random effector is only affecting the position, but we can also make it affect the scale. And something that I think looks really cool is if we go -1 on both the X and Z axis, we're going to now get these really thin glitches. You can see now when I hit play, that geometry is starting to get stretched as well as its position being affected. And of course, if we jump back into our cloner, at the moment we're only showing 10 items at any time. If I increase this to something like 20, it's now going to start duplicating again those items within the cloner. We'll start getting more randomness happening within this animation. So this is the setup I used to start layering up these elements to create this fun glitch effect. And this is essentially that entire technique I used to get those glitches happening. Okay, there's one last thing I want to talk about before we move on from this glitch effect. Let's load up our first material here. And then one thing I found really useful to sell the whole screen effect is to give it just a bit of transparency. So let's turn that on. We'll change the brightness to something like 70. So this now doesn't make it completely transparent. I'm not going to worry about any of the refractions or anything like that. We're just going to decrease that brightness just a little bit. And I'll do this for each texture that I've got within this scene. A really simple scene as far as the texture setup, but it's really allowing us to get some really fun, cool looks. I'll hit play on that. And now we've got our screens randomly getting pushed into space because of that step effector. That Verneuil fracture is creating these nice fractures in our geometry based on that spline. That clone is generating those spheres, which is driving the animation. I think it's a really fun setup, and we've been able to do it really quickly. And on top of that, the playback in our scene is so nice and quick because all we're doing is manipulating those planes. Let's jump back into the example scene that I had set up earlier. So this is essentially the whole technique, building up those extra layers within those cloners, giving it a heap of different screens, if you will, to manipulate and affect using the cloners and those Verneuil fractures. So one last thing I'll touch on in this example scene. Now, like I mentioned earlier, some of those example shots were used from live action footage and then they were motion tracked and had the glitch applied after the fact. Now, to simplify this a little bit, what I did is rather than use live action footage, I've just used this photograph of an iPhone and used the camera calibrator tool to project that back onto geometry. I got a couple of tutorials detailing how to use the camera calibrator tool, so I'll link that down below. Guys, go check that out and it'll give you a good idea about how to set this up. So now when I hit play, we're not getting any camera movement, but I still want this to feel real and raw. I wanted it to feel like someone was spinning around. So I'll show you something that I've been playing around with to get some fun camera movements inside your scene. Let's open up a new scene here. And I'm gonna add a motion tracker into our scene. So what I did, I pulled out my phone and I took this little clip at a similar perspective that the original photo was taken from. And by keeping in mind of exactly where the photo was taken from, so I knew not to push it too far, but it allowed me to spin around this phone a little bit and create some fun handheld looking shots. And now we can use this track purely to design our camera. So let's have a look at that. We'll jump back into Cinema. We've got our new setup here and we've dropped in a motion tracker. Now all we need to do is load in that footage into the footage field. Then we can come over to the 2D tracking tab, hit create auto tracks, and then we'll auto track it. Now you can see this is thinking about it, it's processing, and now we've got these track points happening within our scene. And now that we've created those auto tracks, we're gonna run a 3D solve. So we'll come over to the 3D solve in our motion tracker tab and run 3D solve. Now you're going to notice I'm purely using all the default settings here, making it nice and quick for us. And now when I hit play, that camera is now animated. We've now got this nice animated camera happening within our scene. Now to start with, let's just take this back into that little scene we mocked up before with those glitches. We'll drop it in, and I'm going to jump into my 4 views here. Might even zoom out a little bit. And what the motion track has done is has created these auto features and it's created all these track points. And you can actually see them represented in this scene. Now I know that I shot this footage aiming at a flat surface. And when you look at these track points, you can see they actually do make a perfectly flat surface. But we do just need to rotate them around a little bit. So I'm going to grab my motion tracker, hit R for my rotation tool, and just rotate this around a little bit. And all I'm doing now is trying to reposition our track points to a similar spot at where our glitches are happening. And somewhere about there is already looking pretty good. Now if I toggle open my motion tracker and jump into our solved camera, let's actually turn off show image in our motion tracker. And I might even just rotate this around a little bit so we're viewing it more from the side. You can see what I'm trying to do is just reposition those track points to a similar spot at where those glitches are. Now somewhere about there is looking good just to demonstrate exactly what's going on here. Let's go back to frame 0. We're looking through our solved camera, and now when I hit play, we get all that fun handheld movement that was from that live action shot, but without needing to animate the camera, without needing to worry about any motion tracking of the live action footage to make sure these glitches stick to the phone. We're able to set this up really quickly using that camera calibrator tool. Guys, I'll drop a link down below for a full breakdown on how to attack that. But I hope this is a bit of fun for you guys. We've got this fun camera spinning around this scene, this organic movement. I'll even hide those auto features so we're just looking at our glitches here. Guys, I think this is a lot of fun. It really allows you to create some fun, unique looks using the tools inside Cinema just in their default settings. All right, guys, a real simple setup, but we were able to get some real complex looking animation. All right, hope you can take something away from it, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers, guys.
Mark Zuckerberg conceived a self-made regime